Coffee houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light.
Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I hope everybody had a good and safe Independence Day weekend. I did. I had a great Independence Day weekend, I have to be honest. Took the kids, took the fam to historic sites. They read the Declaration over here. It's why we moved here. It's like getting in a time machine and traveling back a couple hundred years. Everyone still cares about little crazy things called the Declaration of Independence, I know. They understand the words that are written in them. I know, so it's very silly. But it was great. And we had a great weekend. Of course, we always hope everybody stays safe. No fireworks accidents, no drinking and driving, on and on and on. But of course, as every year, there's always something. So I hope that didn't affect you or your loved ones. And we're just able to have a really great time. So saw the messages in the chat. Right back at you. Live chat on locals.com, peoplespundit.locals.com, peoplespundit.locals.com. Robert will be joining us soon, where I'm sure he'll have a live chat open too at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. So we're going to talk a lot today about exit polls. What are the odds they were right? And then these voter-validated surveys that come out afterwards, usually by the Census Bureau first, and then others will do it, private organizations like Pew Research, etc. Here's a caveat I want to explain to many of you, all of you, which is that Pew is, of course, a pollster, a media-respected pollster, without a doubt, but one that has absolutely had their problems in predicting certain outcomes in certain elections, but also how people were going to vote in those elections. So it really doesn't matter, all right? Now, you know how I am when it comes to validating respondents. It's a big deal. You know, if you're going to have a consumer panel, you better know that those people are actual voters. You better be sure. You better be very confident that you're talking to actual voters. And there are just too many online panels that don't do enough to verify. And there are too many online panels who don't have a strict enough screen, and maybe even, dare I say, inexperienced. And they don't have the experience enough to know whether or not someone is telling them the truth. Now, with Pew, they're calling people before elections, and they're coming up with the results they're coming up with. And then after the elections, they are just, simply validating that people are voters. But there are still the inherent problems with these surveys that we see before the elections. So what Robert and I are going to talk about today, and Pew and I have, it's a little bit funny. I didn't want to take their graphics verbatim, so I took one that I thought was the most important, which I know Robert's going to want to go over. And that's education, race, and we can talk a whole lot about what the rest of it says. But just want you to keep in mind, it's like, take it with a grain of salt. Certain things now just simply don't add up to what the census is actually pretty good. They usually are. The exit polls are always clamoring about exit polls for months and months. Then the census comes out and basically disproves the exit polls. It's been happening for the better part of 3 decades or more. And now we have others that add their voices to the mix like Pew. But they have had their own issues. And I'm telling you to take it with a grain, because now we have actual results. And it's really a matter of, do the math. Some of this is basic. It's not difficult arithmetic. You know what a county looks like. You know what a state looks like, for instance. You know how many voters from different ethnicities are in these areas. And some of these exit polls and even these post-election validated surveys just simply don't make sense. They don't add up when you just do simple basic arithmetic, which we just did last week on the show with North Carolina. It is impossible for the polls and the exit polls and the like. It is impossible to forget about the crossover support among Southern ancestral Democrats. It's impossible to explain how Donald Trump won counties like Hyde County when Democrats dominate those areas in registrations. So how did he overwhelmingly win that county? There supposedly got killed among independents in states like North Carolina, right? Non-party affiliations. Well, if Democrats outnumber Republicans in these counties, and he supposedly lost, the former president supposedly lost the MPAs, then how the hell did he take 60+% of the vote? This isn't hard. They just don't count on you like actually going and reading it. Laura's going to flip out because I'm whacking the mouse. All right, so next up is Georgia, one of Robert and I, one of our favorite states. And I'm actually going to give you guys a little bit. Look, if you're on locals, you got an entire PDF and you got a new one today. The first one we released on Saturday was Georgia from a bird's eye view. Here is 7.7 million records in the state of Georgia. Unique records. Of course, there aren't as many of them, right? So there are really only... There's about 1 million when you get rid of change of address flags and deceased and other duplicates. There's about 1 million that come right off that number. So when you hear the Secretary of State say, yes, I'm doing my job and I'm cleaning the voter rolls, I just scrubbed 100,000. There are over 100,000 change of address flags in Fulton County alone. So you didn't purge the rolls that well, did you? And we've showed you that. So if you're on locals, you get these PDFs, and the very first one on Saturday was everything. A bird's eye view. Shows a very tight partisan electorate. If it was a total electorate. What we released today before the show is a 66% likelihood, which, why did we do that? Because that was national turnout, and mostly in certain battleground states, right, where it was important. That is let's say, our baseline for the electorate that we saw in November. So when we say they're at least 66% likely to turn out, what does the electorate do then? And as you can see, Georgia becomes not just leans Republican, it's pretty overwhelming. And what is that? About 4.5 million voters. Just over who turned out for the special election in January 5th for the 2 Senate seats, and just under the presidential election. So pretty ballpark to what a already high turnout electorate would look like. And yet it was pretty overwhelmingly Republican. All right, so we're going to take a look at some of these maps right now, right? And Robert will jump on and join us soon. But I have no doubt that he's going to want to talk about this. Should I wait for him? Should I wait to bring this on? I don't want to repeat myself. You know what? We'll keep Robert out of there for a second. I'm just going to bring this up. Here is, if you're on locals, peoplespundit.locals.com. peoplespundit.locals.com. This is what you get. This is called a rooftop view. It is a Google map, like you have Google Maps on your phone when you're looking for directions. These are addresses that are of affiliated voters and non-affiliated. Obviously, Republican is red, Democrat is blue, and purple is the none. All right? And because he could pop in, I'm actually going to leave him up here. Here is the rooftop view of Georgia when it is 66%. Okay? Here is the rooftop view of Georgia when it is 100%. And you're barely going to see a difference, I'll tell you. Hold on. All right. All you're going to see is that it's a little bit more spaced out. And the reason why is because when there's more voters, it's difficult to see. So it'll attempt to space it out a little bit. All right. So there you go. Generally the same pattern there. No big difference. Right? And let me just make sure I have I don't want to swap them up. Yes, that is the rooftop map of everybody in a nutshell. You get a little bit more detail in the other one, in this one, because we're looking at just 66% of the electorate, or 66% likely to vote, at least. So the parameter we're setting for the model is you are at least 66% likely to show up, all the way to 100% likely to show up. What does that mean? They have voted in every general, whether it was a presidential or midterm, and every primary. And in this case, actually, I just did general, but voting behavior, we do select different ones between primaries and generals. In this one, I said I wanted to know about general election voters. And they're going to look at their history, or recent history, and yes, of course, there is the danger of excluding people who are newer voters, which was a big deal with Pew in this post-election survey of how voters voted, right? Anybody under 30 that was a voter who did not vote in 18 or 16, anybody under 30 was a Biden voter, about 55-38. That's what Pew Research said. Interestingly, voters 30 and up, if they were a new voter, voted for Donald Trump by a pretty significant margin. So, looking back, if you've been following us for a while, looking back to our Florida poll, for instance, we said there's going to be X amount of new voters in Florida. We don't know what these other polls are talking about because from the ages of 30 and above, Donald Trump is carrying every single age group, and it is because of this 30 plus category of new voters. These are younger workers who tend not to vote that often, and then they show up in 2020 in what were historic numbers, even though the former president lost. They were historic numbers nonetheless. And that part about the Pew survey, I actually see. And I do see what they're talking about when the gender gap did narrow. Biden obviously did a little bit better among men. I could see that if you're, depending on the area. I mean, nationally. They're talking about nationally here. So you have some of these big blue states that are going to skew the national number for sure. But the more interesting figure is that Donald Trump still carried white suburban women, which we were told he would not carry. And that really should ring a bell for you because since we started inside the numbers, I've been telling you that. Look at this map right here. And I'm going to exit out in a second here. But Donald Trump outperformed David Perdue in the Atlanta metro area. The reason why it doesn't look the same as it did for Mitt Romney in 2012 is not really because these voters are changing their mind. These neighborhoods don't look the same as they did 8 or 9 years ago. They simply don't. And when we get the census, you're going to see that. These neighborhoods are not made up of the same group of voters, which are, yes, college-educated voters, but white, affluent, maybe not totally professional class, and they still voted Republican. They voted for Mitt Romney. They voted for John McCain, or at least many of them did. They don't look that way anymore. They're more diverse. Racially diverse. And some of the most weakest groups for a Republican presidential candidate or any Republican candidate is an educated minority. And the higher educated, the more Democratic they're going to be. That is what is happening in these neighborhoods. But you know that if you've been watching the show. You know that. So what Georgia and North Carolina, what they have in common, and here's North Carolina for people who didn't see it real quick. All right. Let's give a really quick, brief overview. All right. Here is North Carolina by county partisan. All right. Partisanship by county. And here is the 2020 election. And the point being here, folks, look at the eastern part of North Carolina right now, all the way up to the eastern seaboard. Follow it south, all the way at the southernmost tip, and stay on those border counties, and veer your eyes off to the west. Outside of Mecklenburg, how on earth did those southern, southwestern to south, even to the eastern end, all the way up to Hyde County in the east, how did those counties go Republican? If there isn't the ancestral Democratic voting behavior that we keep talking about. On the presidential level, these voters will vote for a Republican presidential candidate, but maybe the Senate could be closer, but definitely gubernatorial races. They will vote for a Democratic gubernatorial candidate. But they will not vote on the presidential level for a Democrat unless it's, a transcendent figure like Barack Obama in 2008, for instance. That's it. Georgia is very much the same. When you look at the state of Georgia, you can see these pockets of blue in the south. And here, I'll bring it up again. Look at the central part of the state. Donald Trump dominated the central and southern region of the state, regions. And David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler fell grossly shy. Like I've said, I don't even know how many times at this point. Democrats did not win those two races in January. Republicans lost them. This is what happened. All right, so I'm gonna bring in Robert. I'm gonna bring this thing back up when I get Robert in here. But let me bring him in, and I want to get his thoughts because there are polls. There are all of these post-election, all these post-election analysis, and then there's reality and results. I mean and you really can't argue with the reality and the results. Hey, Robert, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hey.
Did you take a look at those maps as I was doing them up? I could throw them up again if you need me to, but I did North Carolina last week just for this purpose. And now I have Georgia, up. If you look at 66% voter turnout is statewide, nationally, right? In many of these areas, that's generally round where everyone, that's the consensus on turnout, in 2020. It is, when you're looking at a bird's eye view of Georgia, it looks so tight. Partisan-wise, it looks so tight. But when you look at just people who are 66% or more likely to vote, so you're, projecting that kind of turnout, you're looking at about 4.5 to 5 million voters at a 7.7 million records, by the way. You're telling me Georgia's not dirty? It's dirty. All right. And by the way, 1 million of those right off the top when it's change of address, Robert. Change of address and deceased suspected, 1 million vanish. So, and duplicates, right? So my point being is this idea, and this is like Pew, we were talking about over the weekend, they're not accounting for this group of people that obviously will not talk to them before the election or after the election, but he could never have won Hyde County, for instance, if these people didn't exist, and they're just missing from these surveys.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Pew.
Hold on, Robert. Hold on. Let me. I don't know why this keeps doing this. Let me give you a. I don't know if it's on your end. It does look like you're there, buddy. Try it again. I don't know why I can't hear you. Give him a second, folks. He'll get it. Can you guys hear him?
Oh, let me see here.
Somebody in the locals chat, let me know if you can hear him. Because it's saying on my end, it's he's there. It's feeding in.
Do you hear me or no?
Yeah, you are, buddy. There you are. That was totally. I think that was on me. Go ahead.
Okay, no problem. So basically, in terms of the Pew, what they call their validated post-election survey, it's just all of their aggregated polling data from the before the election. Then check using those people that they polled, check who voted, and creating demographics from that is my understanding of how they did that. It's better than their average poll because it's a much broader group of people and it's validated. But there's some utility to it, but there's some limitations to it. The biggest limitation is some of these subgroup demographics are unlikely to be correct. Like, for example, Ann Coulter, other people were focusing way too much on what in 2016, Pew, like Quinnipiac, had a crazy gender gap amongst non-college white voters. And it was even, particularly if you broke it down into the non-college, non-evangelical white voters, they basically had a 50-point gender gap in that group. They had non-college, non-evangelical white men voting for Trump by almost 50 points, and non-college, non-evangelical white women voting for Hillary. I mean, it was that number. And so all they did in 2020 is they corrected that problem. So now the numbers are much more accurate, probably within that demo, or conform to other numbers that are out there. But what people are focusing on, because it fits some pre-existing narrative they like, they're highlighting, oh, look, Trump, dropped 15 points amongst non-college white men, which must mean he dropped like 25 points amongst non-college, non-evangelical white men. No, he didn't. Well, they just got the numbers wrong in 2016. They fixed in 2020. There was no major shift in that group. There's no reason to. Very few other polls showed there being any major shift amongst that group. Precinct data really wouldn't conform to that. Now, you can't quite measure gender. But do you really think there was a massive surge amongst working class white women, but not amongst working class, and a massive surge for Biden amongst working class white men? That makes zero sense. So that interpretation of the Pew data is just erroneous. And it's why what you talk about in terms of nesting data. My guess is if you dig into Pew's data, what you'll find is that they're in 2016, like Quinnipiac, they had oversampled young voters. Yeah. So amongst that group. So for people who don't, like, for example, if you end up getting as your representative sample of working class white men, a bunch of 20-year-old college student millennial men, you're not going to have a representative subsample. And Quinnipiac kept getting that. I suspect they had aspects of that this time. And that they were, that in 2016, I think they did that amongst women. They got a bunch of young millennial female college students.
Without a doubt.
That they were calling non-college white women. And then they fixed it this time. But and that's where when people are using it for that basis of shift, it's really not especially useful at all. Mostly what it's useful for is it shows the degree to which upper middle. Like the other thing I think that's mistaken here. I do think they got some things wrong in 2016. In 2020, I think, like, for example, they have Trump improving amongst upper middle class whites.
Yeah,
that didn't happen.
Yeah,
and they have him slightly going down amongst working class whites. That didn't happen. Both of those, that should be reversed. My guess
geographically, Robert, that doesn't make sense. This is why I'm saying, like, results matter now, right? We know where these people live. That didn't freaking happen, Robert.
No,
it just
exactly.
The problem wasn't as bad in 16 as they made it out, though. That's the deal.
Right, exactly. And I think what basically, in fact, what's interesting is when you adjust it for the precinct data, these numbers are almost exactly what I predicted before the election. The only difference is what portion of the voter group of the electorate they ended up making up. The most useful part of the Pew poll is to look at generational data. So ignore some of the, the white college data, ignore some of that aspects because there's reason to believe it's off. But what's interesting is they broke down, one thing I like that Pew does is they break down voter groups by generation. So the greatest generation, silent generation, boomers, millennials, and zoomers. What's interesting is according to their own data, Trump either stayed even or improved from 2016 to 2020 with every single generational cohort.
Yep.
Including especially younger voters. And that's because he did particularly well amongst young Black and Hispanic men, is my guess, non-college.
30 to 39. Yep, 30 to 39, man. That's where
but so how do they get Trump going from down 2 to down 4 in the Pew polls from 2016 to 2020? It's solely how they estimate the percentage of the vote that came from each generation. According to Pew, here's a summary of what Pew's data really shows. If it's accurate, and it's probably a fair part accurate, is that the whole reason Biden won is they got unusual large share turnout amongst younger voters. And in part one, and generational shifts. Like they have the silent generation dropping, the silent and greatest generation, dropping from about 17% of the vote in 2016 to 8% in 2020. Now, that might still be slightly overstating the drop-off, but and then they have Zoomers going from about 2% of the vote to 7-8% of the vote, replacing most of that. And they basically have Zoomer voters replacing silent generation voters, and that entirely explains the election outcome using Pew's data. That's the most interesting thesis that can come out of Pew's data, is how much the generational replacement problem. And by the way, that's almost entirely white voters. That Trump improved even in Pew's own data amongst Black and Latino voters and Hispanic voters. Now they have him only slightly improving amongst Asian voters. But when I looked at the precinct, I thought Trump would not improve amongst Asian voters. But the data where there's big Asian voter groups, I was wrong. It looked to me because it looked like Trump did improve, at least like Orange County. It looked like Trump substantially improved amongst Asian voters.
Even outside of Los Angeles, where there are enclaves of Asian voters, he it's not even so much the margin. He cranked out so many more votes. You know that it when you go into the voter file and you look at some of these are double-digit Asian precincts. So you're not talking about, even Wisconsin's 11%, by the way, 11%. A lot of people don't realize that because it's a white state. One thing, though, Robert, really set a red flag off in my head, and I'm looking into this more before I make any big proclamation here, but they went on and on about how, what really benefited Biden, this big early in-person turnout among Black voters. Robert, if that's true in urban areas, it can't be true, Robert.
That's one thing Pew got wrong. Because you look at the census data, census found the biggest gap between white-Black turnout that's happened since 1980. Yep. It has over 70% of white voters voting amongst the citizen population, and it has around 58% of Black voters voting. So Pew reports an uptick in the percentage of, now that's in part because Pew underestimated the Black share of the vote 2016. The Black share of the vote is only 10% in 2016. They have it as 11% in 2020. The 11% is accurate. It was just closer to 12% in 2016. And for people who don't remember, the Black vote was almost 15% in 2012. I mean, because the Black voters voted at close to 70%, whereas white voters were more like 63 or 64. So, I mean, it was the only election in American history. You could argue 1964. We don't have the best data, but in 1964, Black turnout might have been higher than white turnout where they could vote legally in the North, because obviously Civil Rights Act was on the voting rights and was on the agenda. But and that's where, like, you dig in. Trump. The other thing I think Pew got a little wrong is it underestimated. Now, I think the big story that most people picked up on was that Pew confirmed Trump's big improvement amongst Hispanic voters. But
big.
That was already in the precinct data.
I mean, George W. Bush working class numbers.
Yeah, I mean, he won Zapata County in Texas. I mean, obviously he did much better.
Had to be 40 above. Had to be 40 or above. That's what you and I had been saying this for since the results rolled in. It is impossible for those exit polls and other people's pre-election polls to have been correct. It is impossible. Zapata County, even areas in Nevada, in Arizona, in Florida is a unique case. I'll grant you that. But it's really not now, is it? When we're looking at Texas and these other states. It had to be George W. Bush kind of 40 or better among that working class Hispanic. Had to be, period. Otherwise, and I would argue in Texas, it was probably a majority. You have these other large blue states like California, Robert, that drag it down. Because people have to understand this is a national number. So New York, Illinois, California, much more liberal populations of Hispanics.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, according to Pew, he only lost working class Hispanics by 14 points. I mean, that's the closest margin of any Republican ever.
Yeah.
So my guess is if you looked at older Hispanics, that number might have been close to even. Amongst certain groups. So I think he showed that approach, winning more black voters, winning more Hispanic voters, winning more younger voters. Pew has him improving amongst Gen X voters, improving amongst millennial voters, improving amongst Zoomers. Was a savvy strategy, especially if they're right. And I looked at the census data, and at least they appear to be mostly right. That for example, 18 to 24-year-olds went from, there was at least 3 to 4 million more of them in the electorate than in 2016, and whereas the over 65 vote was up by about the same margin or a little bit less. And again, there's boomers entering that. So generationally, it does appear that basically the whole election in 2020 came down to Zoomers replacing silent generation voters. And the way they got to that was a combination of lockdowns and mass mail-in balloting.
Yeah.
Now, I think some percentage of those votes are questionable ballots. But even putting that aside, you can see why they're so desperate to bring voting rights lawsuits, to try to get H.R. 1 and S1 through, to try to come back at it now with a new voting rights bill named after John Lewis, which I think is appropriate because John Lewis spent the last 20 years of his life being a political fraud. So why not name a voting rights bill after him when it's a fraudulent bill?
Right,
so the last thing John Lewis did useful was was way back when he was not a congressman. Once he was a congressman, he lied all the time. He lied about Obamacare. He lied about a ton of people at different key junctures.
Disgusting behavior with the inauguration, Robert. Disgusting. He was he
lied. He's the guy who took out Bernie Sanders in 2016. Yeah. People forget it was him going, I don't remember. I remember Hillary being there. Hillary was busy being a Goldwater girl in 1964, and there's John Lewis saying, I remember Hillary being there with us for civil rights. She was never a civil rights champion ever her whole life.
No.
But I don't remember Bernie, who was busy getting arrested in 1962.
Who was?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine? That's what a bold-faced liar this guy was. John Lewis was a fraud. He was a fraud. He was a politically corrupt hack who won his office to Congress, by the way, with anti-gay smears against Julian Bond. That's how he even got to Congress. In fact, he got to Congress because white voters thought he was a better black candidate than the black voters did. Black voters didn't vote for John Lewis in his first primary. White voters is the one who put him in there. So he was always I
forgot all about that, man. That's how long he's been around.
Yes.
Or was.
And he used an anti-gay smear and basically kind of suggested Julian Bond was a commie. I mean, John Lewis has been a fraud the only thing useful he did is is when he was politically grandstanding as part of the civil rights movement, he put himself at risk. Congratulations, Johnny. That's it. And he's been living off of that for a half a century, that you couldn't question or criticize any fraudulent activity he engaged in because, well, look, he did something brave in 1963. And it's like, come on. Pat Buchanan was sitting at the MLK rally in Washington, D.C. in 1963. I don't remember people giving him a lot of credit for that. So, I mean, it's extraordinary. But, yeah, they're going to try to bring it back. But you see why? Because their whole basis of they know they only won because the rules changed. And that they wouldn't have won if the rules hadn't changed. The combination of lockdowns and mass mail-in voting and that's where like people that keep trying to look at urban precincts or older voters for where there's questionable ballots.
Yeah, we've talked about
They
this
should
a
be
lot.
looking at apartment buildings. They should be looking at people voting out of parking lots and post office boxes, but particularly apartment buildings. It's where you could do massive ballot harvesting. And it's urban, suburban. That's what the Pew data shows. That basically all of the Biden extra votes that put him over the top came from urban, suburban, millennials and Zoomers, almost all of whom are white, non-Hispanic millennials and Zoomers, who replaced the greatest generation and the silent generation in the voting pool, in part due to natural causes of death, but largely due to the mass mail-in balloting. Because what Trump was denied that both benefited W and Obama was if they would have had 2020 style turnout in 2012, Romney wins. If they would have had 2020 style turnout in 2000, in 2004, John Kerry wins. It was Trump benefited from having much more intense support, but they neutralized that and they negated that by mass mail-in balloting. And someone had been asking, by the way, one of the big Joe Rogan myths out there that's pushed by Kyle Kalinske and that sort of amateur crowd of wannabe intelligent analysts is that effectively what you had was that the election went exactly as expected. But that's really not the case. What happened on election night was Trump exceeded the numbers that the Biden team said he needed to hit. And I was explaining to people, and maybe you can explain it to them, why is it the Biden team released what numbers they needed to get to in order to win? And when they did not get to those numbers, why did they release those numbers?
Yeah, just so everybody knows, Team Biden thought Pennsylvania was gone on election night. So they had a campaign call. Everyone who does election forecasting has campaign calls with the campaigns. You get on it, you hear their strategies. We heard Bill's the day before, Biden's the day after. Or maybe actually they were the same day, a couple hours apart. And they both, take Pennsylvania for instance, they both had generally the same view. And they said, if Trump gets 2.3 on election day, we're done. We're done. And by the way, he blew past it within an hour and a half. It was over. And Team Biden was like, we lost Pennsylvania. The Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania was calling the Biden campaign and saying, don't worry, we're going to find enough votes in Allegheny County to make sure you win the state of Pennsylvania. The team, the mathematics that they had, the arithmetic that they had behind it, which, by the way, matched with Bill's. They're always a little bit more rosy for each side, but generally did match with Bill's. Pennsylvania was gone. It was gone. They had no way to overtake that. And we all had, this is what pisses me off about this test ballot thing that we saw last week, Robert. Only a Democrat's accusation holds any credibility. They're all speaking as if we didn't have the numbers, which I have published now, I don't even know how many times. I've given to both sides of the aisle. We had the numbers of absentee ballots that were returned, how many were outstanding, and how many were expected to be returned. In none of these places did they add up, Robert. I don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? So, and it's like you have Pew here with this like in-person claim that we didn't see before, and it almost, like I said, it raised my alarm bell because it's almost them like attempting to explain how this happened, like, well, it was like, I guess we just weren't paying attention or something to that category of vote. It doesn't, it's crazy. And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I would say the other component with this is I was explaining to people, look, the reason why Biden's people went public, and it was out on Twitter and everywhere else in the media, what numbers they needed to hit on election night,
so they could tell the officials.
Exactly
what they were doing.
So that when they're sitting there on election night and you're in the election office,
yeah,
and you see Trump has exceeded the numbers that Biden says he needs to win, it's time to stop the counting. Yep. It's time to find some more ballots, to find ballots that come in at 4 a.m. like they did in Wisconsin.
2 days later.
And the other thing is both of us were tracking in detail. The other thing about this, to sort of wrap up the Pew aspect, the surprising aspect, I looked at the Zoomer thing a lot, and the reason why I didn't believe it would reach this level percentage of the electorate was because in the early voting portions, they were not hitting the numbers they needed because this was all being captured in live time. It was what, like a lot of these voting databases might be speculative when it comes to which political party a person leans toward, particularly in states that don't have party registration. But they're not going to be wrong about age or gender.
Yep.
And usually not race. Sometimes there's some anomalies there, but not age in particular. Age they're going to have right. And they were underperforming all the way up until Election Day. And somehow a bunch of mail-in ballots came in on election night itself from that voter cohort, according to this Pew data and other data, that magically overcame what they said that they couldn't overcome the day of the election. And that's really the story of the election. And
it's not just Milwaukee. It's not just Philadelphia. It's not just Wayne County where Detroit is. It's not.
It's wherever there's a young population that had massive mail-in balloting. And that's everywhere. That's right. That's all. It's generally not concentrated in student locations. It's concentrated in apartment buildings in urban and near suburban areas. So it's like Eastern Waukesha County. It's Milwaukee County rather than Milwaukee City, because that's where the vote surge came in. It didn't come in from North Milwaukee. Didn't come in from Milwaukee City. It came in from Milwaukee County. Came in from all these young apartment buildings. And what better place to do massive ballot harvesting? That's going to be so hard to track down. That's why they weren't worried about too many dead people voting. They didn't rely on that. They just say, George, Joe, and Jack, my 3 young millennial Zoomer neighbors, all decided to vote. Now prove otherwise. Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah, it was always, and that's part of the grift we saw on the right, though. It was always really, and this is why when people would ask you and I, we would say, listen, this is what you need to do real time right now, because there is no one person you could turn to. And anyone who came to me and asked for help, I made very clear, this is not something you can dig up in a day. You cannot stop the train from rolling. This is the job of a campaign and the election officials themselves to find out where these discrepancies may be or what is going on. But a private entity like myself or Matt Brainerd, who are investigating these things, it was never going to be. That's why the RNC pissed me off so much, because they're over there like, give us the money and we'll stop the steal, right? How are you going to do that? First of all, they had no idea how this even happened. But that's besides the point. They were making it out as if people gave them money, that it would have an impact to the election and somehow it would stop or reverse the course of what was going on. That is not. I'm not going to say it's not possible. I suppose with a massive effort it could be possible, but it would take an army of people like me. It would take, really, an army.
And they wouldn't even fund you or Matt. No. I was in the room when those conversations were taking place.
The call is for free research.
Yep.
You know that.
And the RNC also has massive voter databases. They refused to use them for that purpose. So, it was, they had no real interest. They used it just to grift. And the Republican National Committee did a massive grift.
Yep.
Many of the people in Trump's campaign orbit did a massive grift. And maybe that's a good transition.
I was going to say, isn't that a good segue into the I told you so moment by Robert Barnes? Go ahead, man. Take it. Because we take a lot of crap when we go after some of these people. We take a lot of crap. You were right.
That's true. Yeah. What we talked about was if Trump was smart, he would team up in a creative, independent way to merge with existing platforms, to monetize those platforms, monetize his brand, and build and that kind of independent social media, not try to start one from scratch. If someone was trying to start one from scratch, it was likely a scam of some type, a grift of some type, because why reinvent the wheel? That makes no sense. And, you have Telegram is out there, you have Locals that's out there, you have Parler that's out, you have all these other ones that are out there. There you can figure out which ones make the most sense for you.
Yep.
Exactly. Well, and so, and then been particularly critical of Jason Miller. I got some more questions on Locals over the weekend. What's up with, why is it I've been critical of Jason Miller for those that haven't watched it? Miller's a nitwit. He's a half-wit grifter. That he's the guy who got caught, going to strip clubs and banging while he was married during the campaign, hanging out with media people in 2016, banging campaign staff members, knocking up campaign staff members.
He's not lying, folks.
Trying to deny that he was the father. That's not the guy you have as your spokesperson. If that's your Steve Bannon hiding in the background or something, doing some secret, okay, fine. Who cares what their lifestyle is? But when he's your spokesperson, it's a bad idea for him to be and it shows bad judgment. Also, you just can't trust married people that go to strip clubs and bang random staff members. I'm sorry, man. It's just bad method.
It's not a good look.
No, it's not. And it shows lack of intellect, not just lack of moral compass. You're not even smart enough to know how to handle that. Come on. So so given that I had been critical of him, he'd made a lot of bad tactical decisions and judgments. He weaseled his way back into Trump world through hanging out with Steve Bannon. And he was still screwing up a bunch of stuff there. And when it came out a couple of months ago that Trump was going to launch some new social media platform, we both said that doesn't make sense. That would be a waste of money. That's probably a grift. That just he's getting grifted. Well, of course, this past weekend they announced this so-called replacement for Twitter. That's a totally new platform. And who's the CEO? It's Jason Miller. And so it was a grift the entire time. They put up a bunch of people. A bunch of people created fake accounts. They had a fake account of mine up there. A bunch of people's accounts got hacked on the very first day with ease.
I didn't even look. To see if I had one on there. I heard others did. I didn't look.
It was not technologically secure at all. This guy Brad Laff bragged about how easy it was to hack all the top accounts. Then they were flooding it with pornography images and all the rest. So supposedly Trump wouldn't go to Gab because understandably there's people on Gab that are really just dislikable people, and he was like, I don't want to be associated with them. And I think Torba made a mistake by highlighting that, but that's another story. But they had worse problems on this new so-called free speech platform. So again, the idea you would start anew does not make any sense at all. Given if you want to use that particular kind of platform, then Parler or Telegram probably makes sense. If you don't want to deal with Google, you don't want to deal with Gab, and in the same, he decided to go on Rumble. That made sense. He should have announced it, made a bigger deal out of it. But then I would have, again, I think locals makes the most sense for him by a long mile.
Yeah.
But he's surrounded by people who are trying to monetize his brand for themselves.
Yeah.
And this is partially Trump's fault because he tends to hire cheap. This is how he gets bad lawyers like Michael Cohen. This is how he gets chief financial officers who are figuring out some little extra way to save $10,000 on taxes.
We got to talk about that too, though, for a little bit after this.
That guy's just an idiot. Also, if you divorce the wife, you better pay off the wife, and the wife better not be bitter.
If you got all the money in the world, though, Robert, to investigate the Trump organization, and this is all you come up with, by the way, the New York Times op-ed on this, which is travesty of justice, was a fantastic op-ed. Nobody gets charged for this, folks. This is talk about a grift. The left has been grifting their people for 4.5 years that something's going to be indicted on Trump. Folks, this is the biggest joke of an indictment I have seen in a long, long time. You get a fine for stuff like this. You have to pay, what you owe. You don't get indicted for this, Robert. This is, come on. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not condoning it. I'm simply saying this is ridiculous.
I'm critical of the CFO for being an idiot and trying to cheat in some nitwit way. Save a little bit of money with, I'm going to get a little extra fringe benefit. Won't report it because I'm going to get an extra TV in the office. It's like, come on. Don't be slow. But so I'm critical of him for that, but I'm critical of Trump for hiring people like that. What he's lucky about is that he hasn't hired like a real fraudster criminal. That he hires some of these cheap people, and that backfires on him over and over again because these cheap people do stupid stuff like what Michael Cohen did and what this guy did. But absolutely, you're correct that this is a joke of an indictment. You spend 4.5 years putting Trump under microscopic investigation for every real estate deal he's ever done, every banking deal he's ever done, every development deal he's ever done, every celebrity deal he's ever done. And all you come up with is, hey, by the way, your CFO is a cheap little guy who tried to save a little extra cash. That's it. Yeah, and it's tiny amounts. It's like 10% of the total tax that would be due. It's a complete crock. Now,
such a joke.
He may get convicted because that kind of shenanigan is the one where you don't have a reliance defense because he probably hid it from the accountants and the lawyers. Is my guess. Who? By the way, the reason why he's in trouble, aside from being an idiot. Don't cheat in stupid, obvious ways. That's what Trump understands. Get a bunch of good tax lawyers and tax accountants, and you can find lots of creative ways to limit how much the government takes from you. But that are totally legit and totally legal. You don't need to do some half-wit thing of paying for your kids' tuition as a corporate expense. You don't have to do that at the elite private school. But putting that aside, the fact that they could do this scale of inquiry, and this is all they find, particularly given where Trump was in, and it's confirmation of what we talked about. They were never going to be able to indict Trump without too much political exposure. Without, Jack Posobiec has been talking about how people in the White House were told that directly by the New York District Attorney's Office, that, it would be a disaster to indict Trump because most likely he gets acquitted and we all look like idiots because there's no criminal basis to prosecute him because he understood how the system worked and stayed within it. As he always used to joke in the 2016 campaign, I know how corrupt politics is because I used to be part of it.
I used to be it. Yeah.
I know how lobbyists work because I used to buy them off. I know how politicians are because I used to buy them off. He understood how the legal system worked. But the other problem for New York was they could not go after Trump without scaring every real estate developer in the city, scaring every business entrepreneurial business model in the city. They don't, because all of them, I guarantee, go much further than Trump goes. So, Trump stayed strictly within the rules and within what, good lawyers and good accountants advise. He didn't take unnecessary risks. And so but anybody who knows how construction worked in the 1970s and 80s when Trump was building a lot there knows some of the people he had to do business with.
Pour concrete without getting the mobs okay. You got to get the lackey, councilman who works for the mob. I mean, guys, it's New York City. It was completely run union, rebar, concrete, you name it, you want it, you got to get through. That's why Ted Cruz's comment during the primary is just so ridiculous. We need to look at his taxes because he might have done business with the mob. He was a real estate developer in New York City during the time when the mob controlled real estate, and not just that, construction. Of course, he had to rub elbows with those people, and guess what? So did everybody else. And this is like naive to pretend like this doesn't go, like the politicians are beneath this. Cory Booker has one of the worst reputations for allowing heroin dealers to operate in the city of Newark when he was the mayor. So, I mean, this is like, it's Donald Trump and Trumpalist. That's crazy. Just to cap off the social media thing, though, Robert, I think what chapped a lot of people the most about this, and then I'll, turn to this other organization, Grift. But what really rubbed people the wrong way is that you had a lot of these people who developed the Gitmo Life sites, the local sites. These people put a lot on the line to maybe, not only support him, but to defend principles that were worth defending when they were very unpopular to defend them, and could cost you your career, could cost you friends. And to use the president's name to start a new grift like we see here with this social media site, instead, like you said, reinventing the wheels. Perfect example. There were people he could have paid it forward to, that not just pay it forward, but pay back, for their support. And it's like, after a while, he's taking away reasons for people to continue to defend him, right? So at this point, he's not the president. He doesn't have any reach on social media. He really needs to make better decisions when it comes to this stuff. How do you still command the loyalty of the people who supported you? At least throw them a bone for backing you. I know people, and I'm not going to get into it, but the Gitmo Life site, for instance, a Twitter-like social media alternative, has a great user interface. Better than Twitter, if you ask me. It doesn't have an app for, IT philosophy reasons. They don't want to be regulated by those people, right? So it's like you're kind of just stepping in crap, but you could easily get it on your phone to use on the web, on a browser. And in any event, I know people who are involved with this who destroyed professional relationships over their support, not only for Donald Trump, but they're backing him during the pandemic, when it was extremely unpopular to do things like think for yourself, right? And for them to just, I'm going to go my own way, I'm going to reinvent the wheel, I'm going to do this myself, when you know that there are better alternatives by more competent people who did this before you, they got a big head start on you, and at the very least, all you could do is give them a thumbs up and say, you know what? Trump endorses this platform. Whatever. I mean, same thing with the TV we were talking about, Trump TV. He could have got a Fire Stick, just like Amazon does. Have Newsmax on there, have Rumble on there. Basically replace all of their, because I even know there will be live streaming services that are conservative owned soon. What the hell are they doing? I mean, just that's all it would take. And it would not focus so much of the people that surround him, their attention on trying to run projects they don't know anything about. It would leave them time to focus on what they should be doing, which is looking out for the interest of the former president. Every former president has had a loyal circle that surrounded them and protected them in the post-presidency years. This guy apparently does not have, or at least it's not competent. I mean, he's getting hit with lawfare from the left, or, he's getting hit with, political attacks from the right. I mean, they're not fielding them well.
No, I mean, he has a few people that are still really good that are loosely in the circles, though Stephen Miller's off running his own new legal, foundation now. But he's loosely in the circle. Lewandowski is loosely in the circle. And even though Lewandowski's always been sort of a mixed background sometimes, Dan Scavino's still doing the work that he does well. But and Don Jr. is still involved, but he still has a bunch of semi-competent people. He has some people like his new PR spokesperson is much better than Jason Miller, but they're more limited to that subspace. What he needs is what Trump will always. I was explaining this to someone who was agitated at Trump for some of the failures in the post-presidency time period politically, because sometimes the speeches this past week kind of sounded. I mean, I'm glad he broached into some new subjects. But some of it sounded kind of like the greatest hits tour of, the Who, 10 years after their because a lot of it, he's still going through stuff. When I did this 3 years ago, and I get it. But, at some point, that's not really going to, is your best resonant point. I'm glad he broached into Ashley Babbitt. I'm glad he broached into January 6th. I'm glad he broached into other aspects. And that was a good sign of him acting independently, and it's the benefit of him being out there with his audience because he gets certain feedback that reinforces certain instincts. But other than that, I mean, what he is a master marketer. He's never going to be an architect. He's never going to be an engineer. And he needs both if an actual lasting populist movement is going to be built. And so people are going to have to build it on their own because he's not going to build it. And part of this is, like I said, his instinct toward being cheap at times. He either overpays for corrupt insiders or he underpays for crazy outsiders or grifters. That's been his political history, not his business history. Business history's been 90% better, with the exception of hiring that cheap street came in with Michael Cohen. That cheap street came in with this CFO who created unnecessary vulnerability. Now the CFO's ex-wife is who ratted him out, by the way. I mean, this man, again, it's small change. It's way overrated. The organization should not have been indicted at all. Just the CFO, and the CFO's and most 99 times out of 100, especially in New York, that is never a criminal indictment. That was totally a show me the man, find me the crime kind of case. But Trump creates these weaknesses for himself when he hires cheap. Whenever he hires cheap, it's what I tell you about lawyers, accountants. So, certain pollsters, political consulting. What I used to describe to clients is, look, if you had a serious potential medical risk, are you going to go find the Indian guy down the street taking mostly Medicaid let's say your kid is in trouble? Are you going to find the Medicaid doctor? Is that the one you're going to rely on?
Right.
Or are you going to go find a serious doctor with skill? So you should treat all of that as an investment, not as an expense. And unfortunately, the big question for me as we are now more than 6 months out from Trump's presidency, is would Trump learn from his mistakes? The answer is no, he's not going to learn from his mistakes.
Yeah, I did this, I did that. Those are rebuttal talking points. So when someone attacks you and you're responding in real time, they could make a ridiculous thing and you could say, well, I did this. What are you talking about? Kind of thing. But Americans, people, left, right, center, they want to look to the future. And especially on the right now, they want someone to defend them against what is happening to them right now, which brings me to Brainerd on Friday, when you were just talking about. It was good that he brought up Ashley Babbitt, because there are these attacks that are going on right now, that you talking about what you did 2-3 years ago doesn't help the personal situation of the voter who is looking for someone to defend them right now against this. And speaking of which, I'm doing my level best to move some stuff around because I'm starting to get, not that I'm starting, I'm just feeling more strongly about this, Robert, that what they're doing to people. I probably am going to go to Matt's rally. I think I'm going to show up there. I am, because I'm going to do my best, because this is crazy.
Yeah, Matt's doing great work there. There is another grifter that's trying to parachute his way into this.
Okay, go bring
John
that up,
Pierce,
because...
Yeah, John Pierce is now trying to represent January 6 people. Has created some bogus charity. It's almost guaranteed to be a bogus charity. It's not an approved charity to my knowledge. This is the guy who scammed his way into the Rittenhouse family, charged a ridiculous amount of money, stole money from them, is demanding millions more, is trying to steal more money from them. He's a guy that has, I think, 15, 20 lawsuits currently pending against him, liens and judgments all over the place for fraud. And so you might want to warn Matt, just being associated with this guy is a major mistake.
Well, I'll tell you what, Robert, maybe that's something, and maybe this isn't for on air, but what he had told me is that they're having such a difficult time finding, and this is what I was worried about. This is exactly what I was worried about. He's having a difficult time finding people who are willing to work with him, lawyers I'm talking about. He jumped into this because, and he's, Matt, he's not going to name drop on people, but where the hell are all these so-called conservative politicos who have been around for years, Robert? All right, the Ben Shapiros and all right, they're so conservative. Where the hell are they, Robert? This is not Matt's wheelhouse. Matt's wheelhouse is voter integrity. Folks, you do not want to distract Matt Brainerd away from doing what he is doing with voter integrity. The organization can only do so much. There are lots of other lawyers, conservative lawyers, and not just lawyers, but people who have been, crowing about First, Second, Fourth Amendment rights for years. Where the hell are they? Where are they, Robert?
Oh, yeah, well, it's also amazing. I mean, there's two major hurdles that are faced. One is that it's in the District of Columbia. So they only allow D.C. lawyers to appear. If you are outside D.C., you have to get a D.C. local counsel. And so either way, a D.C. lawyer has to be on the file. And that's a massive hurdle.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Because there's only a small number of lawyers that have D.C. licensures, and 99% of them lean to the left. So that's why, in part, they brought the case where they did. There probably should be a lot of requests.
But the largest number of defendants come from Marion County, Florida.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's absurd where they're bringing charges. And there's some good venue transfer motions pending, but again, the second, that's another hurdle. Is the judges. The judges are all establishment institutionalists, even
and they could just lie like this. They could just use fake news as a justification to deny bond, Robert. They could really do that. There's nowhere else to go. There's no one else to appeal to.
You're stuck in the D.C. system. Unless the U.S. Supreme Court gets involved, see the D.C. District Court or D.C. Court of Appeals.
Yeah, the D.C. Court of Appeals, right? That's it.
Yeah, and the D.C. Court of Appeals is notorious. I mean, look what they did in the Flynn case.
Yeah.
And so that's problem one. Problem two is the bar in general. The bar in general is overwhelmingly, the criminal defense bar especially, overwhelmingly liberal. I've been trying to criticize I can't personally get involved. I can only represent one of the 600 plus people anyway. I can't get involved because it would impair the Rittenhouse defense. Because if I show up in any January 6th case, they're gonna hang that around Kyle Rittenhouse. So I can't touch that right now until the Rittenhouse case is done. That won't be until next. The trial is in November. But I can only represent one person anyway. In all likelihood, they would likely say conflicts. So I represented more than one. Yeah. So but the problem is the criminal defense bar is 95% liberal. So I mean that's now I've been ragging those guys.
Major problems
because a lot of these guys. I mean, I know a good number of them. A lot of them represented Guantanamo people, and it's like, hold on a second. If you can represent if you can represent actual terrorists in Guantanamo, you can represent some grandma that wanders into the Capitol. And there are a few good lawyers in D.C. that have got involved, But there needs to be, what needs to happen is like a Chicago 7 style coordination. Somebody, find the 2 or 3 good lawyers that are willing to take lead. Everybody piggyback off of those people, cut and paste on their briefs. Continue to bring pressure on public defenders in the court of public opinion who are doing nonsense like that public defender who had her client go through a re-education camp to beg for probation for misdemeanor trespass. I mean, misdemeanor trespass with someone with no criminal history never goes to prison. You didn't need to put the re-education camp on top of it to beg the court. And there needs to be a lot more political attacks on the court. The court system here is behaving inappropriately. In my view, what I've been doing is giving people strategic advice that any of these lawyers can run with, and maybe if Matt finds somebody that can coordinate, can give strategy, and then give the messages to even the public defenders. Every public defender, if you send them a pre-done brief, will usually file it. I mean, because that saves them time and work.
It's giving them, you're doing their
work. So you say, here's how you can move to transfer. I would move to disqualify every D.C. judge because say, look, this is a D.C. issue. Everybody who's part of the political structure, federal political structure in D.C., feels threatened and feels like they were a victim. It means none of you can be impartial. You have to hammer them with that up front and then make them prove they're impartial by actually obeying the law. And that's the only way you might not win by recusal, but you win by forcing them to face that reality. And what's the worst case scenario? They screw you over like they were going to anyway. So I mean, the worst case scenario is no change. The best case scenario is that they're out and you get a different judge. The interim scenario is that they feel pressure to prove their impartiality and actually follow the law. So there's a lot of ways to fight these political cases that can be smart and savvy, and it can be coordinated by lawyers working. I have a bunch of lawyers helping out in the Rittenhouse behind the scenes. They aren't necessarily going to be in front of the cameras, and all of them don't necessarily want to be. But there are ways in which that you could form a legal defense team that can, there's people at prestigious law firms that would be willing to help as long as their names weren't on anything. So there are ways to build a good, sophisticated team.
He did get one person to bite, but then their employer threatened to basically kick them out.
Right, exactly. And so the more effective is find some front people that are willing to file whatever somebody else writes. Or, in fact, to be honest with you, the people that currently exist, the public defenders likely would file it in most cases because it becomes issues of legal malpractice and other things if they don't. Now, they're not really worried about legal malpractice, but every public defender down deep thinks of themselves as doing the right thing by their client. So, there's more pressure on them if you send them something, say, hey, I think this could really work for your client, and other lawyers are filing it, there's more pressure on them to file it. There's ways in which people can gather information and documentation and both send it to their lawyers, find out who the lawyers are, or send it, even if they're in custody, that's legal mail. Usually that the individual gets it so they know what some of their rights are. One of the things that should be happening is discovery request, motions to disqualify, motions to transfer for venue, but also I would move to disqualify the U.S. Attorney's Office for District of Columbia on grounds of conflicts and contaminating the court of public opinion like that first one did, who admitted he locked everybody up to prevent protest of Joe Biden. Extraordinary admission. This is why Putin is making fun of the U.S. using this case.
Robert, the nerve of anyone in Washington, D.C. to criticize the Russian court, really government, whatever, but to criticize them for basically calling his one and only dissident an outlaw, right? So, that's basically what they did, but what? Putin is going to maybe lock up one guy. Joe Biden has locked up more people than Putin.
And that one guy was a guy that was convicted twice of actual fraud and has real victims. That's the extraordinary. That's where Putin's like, hey, look, I'm not locking up 600 people because they protested for Inauguration Day. That's you guys that are doing
Moscow,
that.
Buddy. Moscow.
He goes, I'm not summarily executing people right on the Capitol steps. The rumor, by the way, I think the reason why Trump is re-raising it also now, Pence should have kept his head down. Pence should not have come back out and started giving. What people don't understand is that Pence world in D.C. really thinks he's going to be the nominee in 2024.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. Yes, absolutely. They're hoping there's going to be 3 Trump-like candidates that are kind of serious, and Pence is going to sneak through, like kind of like a reverse of what Trump did in 2016. They absolutely believe that they can take this back with Mike Pence.
Yep. And that's why, like, him going to that place where he thought he'd be cheered and then he got booed.
Yep.
That was, mistake. And then mistake number 2 was talking about the election issues. He should have just kept his mouth shut.
Just shut up. Yeah.
Because I think the reason why Trump is also talking about Ashley Babbitt is because the rumor is it was part of Pence's security team that shot her.
No.
Don't know if that's true, but, it wouldn't surprise me even if Trump doesn't know one way or the other, that's why Trump is raising it. Because Trump is still very bitter towards Pence, but he would have let it lie if Pence would have laid low. Pence decided to stick his head up, and that's what, like, people out there. That there are some people on the right saying abandon Trump, so forth. Trump is still by far the best political marketer of populism. Period on the right. The goal is we cannot rely upon Trump to build the architecture or the engineering of a populist movement. That has to be done independent of and separate from Trump. And then if he runs again and does well, it's lended to him institutionally with constant pressure in the court of public opinion to remind him of the benefit of having that. But he's still like, if DeSantis will not run against Trump unless something dramatically changes between now and then. DeSantis is not interested in, right now Trump just conquers the field. He's over half of the vote goes to Trump right away. Maybe that will change in 3 years, but I don't think so.
Yeah, that would be really... There's going to be this lane that would love DeSantis and would vote for him over Trump, but at this point, Trump would need to, like, fall on his face or just be a lamenter, which is what I was getting to before. So, like, basically this,
if he's still in the past in 2024, that's a problem.
Yeah, he could kill himself if he does that. People want to hear about the future and they want to hear about right now. What are you going to do for me right now? You're going to defend me right now. Speaking of which, where the hell is Representative Daniel Webster? Where the hell is even Representative Jim Jordan and others? Maybe you don't even need constituents in the case of Jordan, but Webster does. He has many of these people locked up are his constituents. Where the hell are these people? Talk about pressure. Do you think for a second if that was somebody in the Bronx, in AOC's district, or in the 8th Congressional District in Michigan, that Rashida Tlaib wouldn't be all like, they would be having meltdowns. There'd be people in the streets. Believe me, they would get those people out. Robert, they would get them out. ROR, man. ROR. And basically, Republicans are just cowards. They're complete cowards. Everything from big pharma to this, man, they have no spine on anything, and they're really setting themselves up if they don't pivot soon to having a backbone, and it's like their face on Fox News is not Kevin McCarthy anymore. They're going to lose an opportunity to really crush the House.
Yeah, no doubt. Right now what they've most effectively done is in the Senate they've derailed Biden's agenda.
Yeah,
that's mostly what they've done. Like, the infrastructure bill he's now talking about is, if you dig into it, is smaller than Trump's, because it's purportedly about a little over $1 trillion, but you dig in, it over half of it is money that's already allocated to infrastructure. It's like $500 billion is money that's already allocated, so they're calling it something bigger so it looks better. Of the remaining amount, large portion of it's coming from just reshifting COVID funding. So it's like you look at how much new, and then the other aspect is a lot of it's over 5 years or 10 years. So you dig into the numbers, and it's like this is not much at all. Probably smart for Republicans. To agree to some amount of infrastructure, as long as it's actual infrastructure, not boondoggles and not. That's the downside, though. He said, "I'm not doing that unless." And Lindsey Graham's so full of crap. He does the deal, then he turns around and says, "No, I'm not going to do the deal." Yeah. And then the next day, his White House people are saying, "No, he really meant he's still going to do the deal." So he doesn't. If he doesn't do the deal, nothing gets through, because what the Democrats are trying to hang it up on the left is on climate change.
Yeah,
they're obsessed with climate, Green New Deal being included. Well, that's never going to pass the Senate. It's never going to happen. They really thought they could get Manchin and Sinema to fold and kill the filibuster and push every nutty notion through without losing any Democrats.
And that's
That
where
was
these
not gonna
attacks
happen
on
with-
cinema are coming from, by the way, just so everybody knows that. It's important for all these pieces about cinema being a monster to work for and basically abusive in the workforce. This is because cinema isn't towing the line on everything. So they're attacking the hell out of her in Politico, in all the papers that the DC Politicos run to when they're trying to smear someone or make somebody comply. So that is what was behind, no, without a doubt, that is what was behind that. And then Robert, another I told you so moment, the vice president's office is the most dysfunctional vice presidency in the history of modern vice presidencies. Did you read that? Again, that is because of what we said. Her popularity's cratering. I gauged it in the last poll we did. She had a brief bump. She was never popular. She had a brief bump because she was Joe Biden's vice president. That's it. And it was a honeymoon. Now she's unpopular again, and the Biden people are leaking that she is dysfunctional and basically incompetent. So, look, and do you remember how badly her campaign was run? I mean, it was a dereliction of duty from the media not to tell the American people. Of course she's dysfunctional. That's probably 100% true, that story.
It's no surprise at all for anyone who knows Harris. I mean, Harris weaseled her way. She misunderstood Pancho Villa's statement. She thought Pancho Villa said he'd rather live on his knees than stand on his feet. And so you look at how her whole history. She used Willie Brown to get into the San Francisco's office. Was not well liked when she was DA of San Francisco. Then uses Willie Brown's machine and lucky opportunity to get to the United States Senate, where she tried to grandstand mostly unsuccessfully. Was the number one establishment candidate. She was the favorite in the betting markets to be the Democratic nominee because of the entire media and neoliberal and Wall Street establishments all lined behind her. And her campaign was so atrocious, Tulsi Gabbard helped take her out, and she was out of the race before Iowa even happened. So when you have somebody like that, you have someone who's got no track record of success, a track record of problems, she had a large number of people who hate her and despise her. The Feinstein machine hates her. The Pelosi machine is on and off hating her. So that's in her own backyard. And what she was good at was knifing other people with establishment connections.
Yep.
And the problem is her popularity continues to sag, and she is a miserable person to work for, and that just information came out. It's also because the entire Biden administration is chaotic. We're like one of those old imperial regimes or empires that has like a kid king that everybody's fighting and knifing each other behind the scenes.
Reminds me
That's
of Japan.
what this is like. We have a derelict dementia candidate as president. We have a nitwit as vice president. I mean, this is not someone who's, if you prepare her, she can do well like she did against Biden in that first debate. But she's not naturally skilled on her feet. That's why she does that weird cackle every time she gets nervous.
Yeah, she's an angry person. A mean
person.
And
And someone who's just not she's just not well, the only thing she's good at is like being inside a corporate structure, screwing over somebody higher up than her, or even with her. Something like that. That backroom politics of that kind. She was not known as a good legislator. She was not known as good working the press. She was not known as good at working the system. And we have kind of a debate, and so that's why they really can't afford to take Biden out. She is too unpopular, as you note, and that means they all know she can't win in 2024. They've seen enough now to realize that. That's why she never should have been picked, frankly. She was the neoliberal control mechanism on Biden because of her deep neoliberal establishment ties as their favored candidate. But she's so incompetent, so incapable, that they're now realizing, well, we can't really use her in public office. We can't use, especially with Trump saying maybe I'll run again, with his, on Sean Hannity, that he's already made up his mind. Whether he implied that meant, I would say it was the interview the week before with Dave Rubin that led me to believe he had decided he was actually going to run again, because he slipped up in that interview with Rubin. And he started being unusually honest because Rubin had a very good rapport with him. People can see the unedited, uncensored video at Rubin Report on Locals. And what he said was, some people were saying it's too early to do these rallies, and he caught himself. In the old days when he would just riff you would find him catching himself on occasion and quickly shifting out of it when he realized he didn't want to go someplace. And that told me what he was really saying was, I've already made up my mind to run, and rallies are my key organizational tool. And some people thought, why start doing it 3 years out? And I was like, nah, we're 6 months away. Let's go ahead and start getting the baby rolling. Now, he still gets the best audience. I think he would be better off getting away from now that he's no longer president. Get away from the teleprompter. Go back to old school riffing, because he had such pure natural entertainment skill when he would just get up there and riff. That I think that would be much more effective. But anybody expecting him to build the architecture of a long-time movement, build the engineering, the pipes of a long-time movement, it ain't happening with Trump. That's now clear 6 months out. That Trump's just going to be a great marketer. The populist movement can utilize that. He's still the easiest ticket to the White House right now. But the populist movement has to build independent of Trump. And that's probably better anyway, frankly.
Which is a good way to segue into this question Owen asked on locals. And if you have anybody in the locals chat, I don't know if you have put up one too, by all means, read out the questions, Robert. But this is good. And we were talking about how important organization is and what the Democrats did in the election with changing the rules because of COVID. And he basically says, he's asking, how centralized do you think the Democrats were in what they did election night and in the days that followed? I'm wondering that given what you said about Biden's team putting out their numbers and what that meant, how much is it something unspoken by both sides but understood? Given Mark Elias went around to each state that looked like it would offer any resistance to the sometimes unconstitutional or illegal ways Democrats were altering how elections are conducted. All right, that's a really good question, and I'll tell you what Robert and I have been saying is that, and it's what our investigations have shown, that Robert and I were right. This is something that they outsourced and baked in. There is a lot unspoken, like circa Bob Beckel 2014 election night on Fox News when he blurted out that that's what they do. They're winking at each other all the time, and that's why Gillespie was not going to defeat Mark Warner in that very close Senate race, because that's what they were doing. They were winking to each other over in Fairfax County. We're going to need this many more. Right? And this was stuff they had already baked in, Owen, and it was very decentralized when it came to how they went out and actually did it. It's basically everybody knew what was expected of them, and that they could basically turn a blind eye. Some of these people could turn a blind eye. The only thing organized, Robert, and this is what is important if you're going to be a populist movement and you need a structure, is that the only organization that I could see having the reach to do what needed to be done were public sector unions. So you couldn't have turned a blind eye that much. But this is a couple weeks ago, you and I were discussing this. This is a key aspect to it too. These centralized vote counting centers, very, very important, because you're essentially decentralizing and outsourcing the ability to go get those ballots or have those ballots out. But once it's time to collect and count them, that has to be centralized, because you cannot have, in these very key areas, by the way, the arena in Atlanta, you have Maricopa County, you have all these areas where we're all questioning what happened. Milwaukee, Philadelphia, they do this everywhere, folks. Detroit. And they're not just urban votes being counted in these centralized vote counting areas. They're those excerpts and metro burbs. That's what's coming in there. So you got to keep that in mind. I mean, something you want to add to that, Robert?
Yeah, two things. One is what Barack Obama let out back in 2008 was he said, people don't understand how hard it would be to steal an election, because all the counting is done and gathering of the ballots is done at every little precinct. And you'd have to get coordination by every little precinct, and that would be very hard to do, which was true. In fact, one of the ways I used to identify as ways you could catch fraud is you find demographically similar precincts that have disparate results. And you can figure out one of those precincts, they pack the ballots in. Or throughout ballots, whichever the case may be. And usually they stack the ballots is the more common event. So in 2020, one of the warning signs should have been these big urban counties saying, and big suburban counties saying that they're going to do concentrated voting at one location. That allowed for all kinds of ballot custody issues to arise, because then you could have loss of you no longer needed to control 20 precincts to stuff the ballot box. You just needed to have the person doing the transport to be doing it, or the person that brought it in to be doing it, or the person responsible for storage at that centralized location to be doing it. Any of those ways. And all of a sudden you needed, and then what happened in Fulton County, finally they have printed, the Secretary of State of Georgia promised in 2018 when he wrote a $106 million check to Dominion that the great advantage of it was you could publish all the ballots to the world because all ballots would now be digitized with one little hit of the keyboard. He has refused, like everyone else has refused. Fulton County judge has now granted the Atlanta Journal-Constitution printing all of the absentee ballots.
Who I don't really trust.
So everybody can go online and see the digitized ballots of all the absentee ballots from Fulton County. And which that still isn't all the ballots, but it'd still be interesting. And people on my locals board were already finding anomalies.
Yep.
Where they're like writing in, you have totally different handwriting on the same ballot.
Yep.
How did that happen? You know, things like that. So you're going to find some anomalies that are very useful. The other thing was
Robert, that judge was like, these ballots look pristine. Like they were.
That's a separate issue.
Folded.
Yeah, exactly. Like if it's an absentee ballot, it shouldn't look like it's never been folded before. You had unusual military ballots. That was another place of questionable ballots that came in from military places that not only were unusually pro-Biden but looked weird. That were spotted in Georgia, and and this is part of the utility of the Arizona audit. I told people that other than signature checks, the other way to examine an honest, transparent election audit is to look at the big issue with the machines was never, in my view, the machines. The problem was individuals. It interrupted chain of custody of ballots. This is something people still haven't fully wrapped their heads around.
No.
Traditionally, the way ballots work is you order a certain number. Let's say you order 10,000 ballots. You have to keep strict chain of custody from your ordering of them to your receipt of them to your handing out of them to how many got counted, how many got thrown out, and how many never got used. Right? So you have a strict chain of custody so you know someone didn't stuff the ballot. Relatively. I mean, there's always other ways to do so. You could replace existing ballots with substitute ballots, things like that. There's still ways you can game the system, but one way to prevent aspects of gaming the system is strict control over the chain of custody, like evidence, of a ballot. The problem with the machines being able to print out paper copies of their ballots that you'd make digitally. The original problem was there was no paper copy, so you had no idea it was only stored in the machine. They tried to solve that by printing out the paper, but that didn't fully resolve the problem because what that means is you no longer have chain of custody of ballots. What you have is you have however many ballots they print out right at the machine. And so the risk was, and we were investigating in Georgia before Looney Lynn Wood and Nutty Sidney Powell took over and hijacked the case for their wacky theories before they ruined, frankly, the Georgia election contest challenge and the other challenges by buying into obvious
complete
nonsense.
Charade out of it, circus.
Yeah, I mean, my sympathy for him keeps going down. I mean, Sydney's now in trouble in Florida for setting up what appears to be a bogus charity. I mean, problem after problem after problem. I'm done. I've never defended them, but I haven't been as critical as I could have been. And it's obvious they're a total waste of space. And how damaging they're been. And Mike Lindell is still chasing after their nonsense, which is unfortunate. And Patrick Byrne is still chasing after aspects of that nonsense. So it's all a big distraction. But the issue was not they were not going to hack the machines. There's 100 reasons why that was problematic. Even if you thought that was an effective means to pad ballots. The easier way is you would do what happened in New York this past week, which is what you do is you print test ballots. And you just include those test ballots with the actual ballots. And the way that might show up is the test ballots will look different or they'll have different sequencing numbers on the bottom.
Yep.
And I kept saying that this was the risk. We had whistleblowers in Fulton County saying they had witnessed this. They had witnessed the people come in, these techs, come in and print out test ballots that they were put into boxes. They said, were not segregated the way they were supposed to, and they were never destroyed. That's what's supposed to happen. You print out a test ballot to make sure the machine is working correctly. So someone puts, they want Biden, they want Trump. It comes out Biden or Trump on the print ballot. You're making sure the machine works correctly, it's printing correctly. But the problem is that's an actual ballot where some was marked for a candidate. So you need that shredded Otherwise, there's a chance that ballot ends up being counted at some point. And the only other protection against it is the ballot might look unusual compared to what it's supposed to be. Like if it's supposed to be an absentee ballot, it should not look like a computer printed out ballot. Another issue that's showing up in some of these ballots. Another reason why I wanted to see them. And now people can go to the Fulton County one and look up, do it for themselves, crowdsource it. It's what everybody's been doing in Arizona. We'll have results for that probably next week. But what they're reporting are issues with some of the ballots and a gap between the total number of ballots counted and the number of printed ballots that they have. And amazing was they said this couldn't happen, and then mayor's race in New York City takes place, and they accidentally counted 135,000 fake ballots. And here the question is test ballots, because that's what happened. They went in the machines, tested the machines, never got rid of those excess ballots, and then counted them all. And the first thing the mayor, and I guarantee you, it's going to accidentally show that the establishment-favored candidate endorsed by the New York Times had a disproportionate number of those test ballots.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, and that's going to be...
I'd be shocked if it was any different, Robert. I would be
absolutely
shocked if it was any different. And
this is one of the big problems with machines. There needs to be strict control over how testing ballots take place, strict control, monitoring, surveillance of those, destruction of those, abilities to track them and trace them. The addition, I don't know, it's Florida or so, it's another state that maybe it's even Tennessee. There's a state that's looking at watermarking ballots. That would be useful for this purpose because it would make sure, some sort of something on the ballot itself so that test ballots could never even accidentally show up as real ballots. It's one of the big flaws, highlighted what happened in New York. And, leave it to the Democratic Party to try to steal power from a black man.
And Robert, the only reason why this was taken, because if you go and look at Twitter and all the blue check marks that responded to the Adams campaign, they were calling him mini Trump. They were going to Trump him, but in the end,
our good pal Dave Wasserman was saying, was on that bandwagon.
That's right,
Dave. I mean, that guy can't get anything right.
He can't. It's not, man. He's just if he says something or tweets something, you should automatically assume the opposite is true. That's how bad his track record is. But he knows what's expected of him, so he automatically pounced because he just knows. He knows what time it is. He knows his role. He's a good little doggy, and he walks his leash, and that's it. But the bottom line is, we were told this couldn't happen, and I'm looking at Maricopa and some of the problems highlighted by Flanagan. And I'm thinking to myself, how could this even be possible, right? Well, this is how it could be possible. It is. Now you have some ballots that had undercounts, some ballots that were, that had more ballots than were recorded. More recorded votes than they found ballots. So on some of them, there were more votes in the total official result than they were able to physically find. All right, that's to trace. And then on the flip side, there were some that it was disproportionate the other way, but there were some where there were actually a few more physical records than there were votes counted. So they're running into Detroit style problems. Yeah,
every time you do an audit of Detroit, it's why they shut down the 2016 recount.
This is what happened.
Because they kept finding discrepancies between how many people were listed as voting in the precinct and how many ballots there were. Yep. It's been, now that's just lazy fraud, by the way, because if you're doing the job right, when you're stuffing those ballots, you just say you look through who didn't vote that day, and you just add their name.
Or it's hasty, Robert, or it's hasty, or Fox News makes a call that is absolutely inexplicable to stop the counting, to make the narrative that the former president lost a must-win state, and you get hasty and you do what you need to do for that moment to hold on. And that is, I don't put that past them at all. Bottom line here in New York, I was inclined to at least try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the more I learn about it, the more I realize that there were many sets of eyes on these results. So you're telling me nobody noticed in the CSV that there were 135,000 more? This isn't hard.
I mean, it was easy for Adam.
Math.
I was like, hold on a second. Where do these extra 100,000 people come from?
Wait a minute.
This was not like brain surgery. I mean, and to give people an idea, I mean, that's like 20% of all ballots, I think, in the New York mayor's race, the Democratic primary. So it's like, this wasn't like some 100,000 out of 10 million, right? I mean, this was like 100,000 out of 500,000. So, I mean, it should have stood out. And people were like, And the fact that they would have gone along with this. All the media would have gone along with it.
Absolutely. Dave Wasserman was going to go along with it.
But for the fact that you had a powerful black Democratic politician who knew they were going to try to screw him with it. But for him, they would have got, and think about what that means for 2020.
Yeah, well, this is the sad reality. It's only because of who he is, right? What he is, meaning he's a Democrat.
He's the borough president. He's got old school connections in New York.
Yeah, he has friends.
Got, they're all political machines are still very alive and well in New York. He was even though they wanted to screw him over, he's probably the guy not to screw over.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's without a doubt he didn't have, like you said, there were people in Fulton, whistleblowers in Fulton County and elsewhere that, basically said this is what happened. There were affidavits, signed affidavits. The Adams campaign had none of this. And exactly. Basically they had basic arithmetic. So did Republicans in November, though, because that was the first thing people did call and ask me for. What were the results that you, the decision desk, the AP, all of you, what were the results that you had? What were the expected outstanding absentees? We had these numbers. This is what people don't seem to understand. We had these numbers, and the pattern is very clear. Where they exceeded it and the election day vote overtook it, Trump won or hung on. Like in North Carolina, for instance. All right, where they blew past that number, and it was like a free for all. And it exceeded the number we were given. Then the election day margin did not hold. It's a very simple pattern, Robert.
The best comparison is Florida. Florida, where they announced what the total ballots were, where they came from, etc. Nothing weird happened. In the states where they were allowed to just keep changing that number of how many ballots they had, which is basically what New York did. New York dramatically changed how many ballots they had. And the only difference is they got caught in ways he could easily prove, and he was not the guy to screw over. But otherwise, they would. If that had been the guardian angel guy that they screwed over,
they wouldn't
have cared. They would have gone along with it.
It eviscerated him. They would have eviscerated him and called him a Trump. Here we're going to go. It's Big Lie 2.0. Big Lie. That's what they would have done. Notice, folks, look at how quickly they all jumped on. They had no information. They didn't look it up. They didn't do either that or they did and they just lied. But they didn't have the facts on their side. They immediately went in a knee-jerk reaction mode to attack. Because any hole in the integrity of our election, anywhere, is lending credibility to the arguments that people like myself, Robert, and the former president have been making for months. It really was never about whether it would be intentional or not, too. This is something like the media always wants to take that other leap. The bottom line is we have been conducting elections in this country for decades upon decades upon decades a certain way. And we dramatically, radically even, changed how we do that. And we were expecting states to do it within 60 days. And I'll tell you, we had this meeting, before the election, to make sure the graphics were all right, the results being reported were okay. These officials in Milwaukee were, to use their own words, we're just like looking for solid data. So, okay, we're not going to have precinct level data. We're not going to have any precinct level data. Nothing. Okay. What do you have outstanding? They were like, look, we're just trying to keep our heads above water. We are trying to make it look like we know how to do this. That is what they said.
And one of the keys from all this that people should take away, aside from, more audits with elections moving forward, more transparency, better rules, back to the traditional rules and then improvement on those rules, is the other component of all this is not the centralized vote counting locations are a bad idea. Yeah. Because there's too many risks points along the way. You're much better off making, and people think of it as inconvenient to have 100 precincts or 300 precincts or 500 precincts where votes are counted. The reality is it's a lot harder to steal across 500 precincts than just one centralized location where there's multiple mechanisms by which, any heist basically can occur. and they should discourage this in the future. No more centralized vote. They thought it would make it more secure. It made it much less secure, and they should have known, because Democrats were the ones pushing this. Democrats weren't pushing centralized locations in heavily Democratic counties because they wanted to really make sure everybody crossed their T's and dotted their I's.
Yeah, you should know automatically by now that if Democrats are pushing for something, then you should probably raise your eyebrow to it. If they're,
you're asking the thieves to determine how you're going to guard the hen house.
That's right. I mean, what do you think? What are you thinking here? Which you got to give credit where credit is due to certain people. So let's give a little shout out to Pennsylvania, where the state legislature is absolutely going to put voter ID on the ballot. This is what I've been telling, to give people some advice here. You have these issues where we have polled, it really shouldn't be a Republican versus Democrat issue. Voter ID, better way to verify all of these things, right? Even election day deadlines where voters were overwhelmingly in favor of, they understood, they got it. That, of course, late arriving ballots are just suspicious, and that should not happen. You don't need to give us a margin at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, but you damn sure have to tell us how many votes you got. And they get it. And it's really not right or left. It's only the media tears us apart with this. But in Pennsylvania, now for the third time, they're putting these things to a vote in an amendment, a proposition, and statewide. This is the way to do it. You have to force these questions. You have to put them to voters.
And put stuff. It's what we said for them to do in Georgia. Put the election on the ballot. Put the recount on the recall, and or put the recall on the recount and on the runoff. And if you did so, then that would give their best chance. Of course, they screwed that up. But anytime you can submit, like I looked at in particular the census data from Arizona. What we talked about before the election, that one of the risks was there'd be this youth surge of turnout because of pot being on the ballot. Well, according to the census, they had a 35% turnout increase amongst young voters between 2016 and 2020 in Arizona, right? But just pot being on the ballot is what, by itself, you remove pot from the ballot, Arizona safely goes Trump. Just that by itself. And Republicans should realize the same thing. Put good populist issues on the ballot on election reform. Voter ID is universally popular. Announcing how many ballots you have at the close of an election right before you start counting the ballots, because that's the problem.
Pretty key.
You start counting the ballots, and you're like, oh, I think we need another 10,000. Remember Georgia? Every hour, every day for a week, they were announcing, another 10,000. Oh, look here, another 15,000. Oh, look, the ballot fairy brought another 20,000. The ballot stork brought another 30,000 over here. That's universe, like what your polling showed. These are 75-25 principles. These are overwhelmingly possible, overwhelmingly popular. And so if you are a state that allows these things to go on the ballot, put them on the ballot for 2022 and 2024. Get them on the ballot. Now, if you're a state that has petitions and things like that, then use that method to get them on the ballot. But because that will bring people out and it will establish it as clear and clean law. So it's foolish that Democrats have figured this out. Why did they think? Why in 2018 there was 8 states that had pot on the ballot? Yep. Does anybody think that was a coincidence? Right. They timed it to make sure that group of voters who otherwise are not enthused about the Democratic Party, but will, as a default, vote more Democrat than Republican due to their generational demographics, and because Republicans have made the mistake of being, they put Sessions in charge of being anti-pot, like we're still in the 1950s. But whatever you think of pot, politically, people are just not obsessed with controlling pot outside of really hardcore religious conservative circles. And even there, it's not nearly the important issue compared to, say, abortion is. Or women or men, hanging out at women's spas and women's bathrooms and all the rest. That's another one to put on the ballot. That's another 3-to-1 issue.
Transgender issues in general, the sports competitions, overwhelming.
Did you see the South Park episode? South Park did an episode where they had Randy, what was his name? Not Randy Travis. What was that, a wrestler that was with an R, over the top, macho, redneck kind of personality?
Ric Flair? The
later one.
I can't.
God. I'm blanking on his name. Maybe somebody will remember in the chat. But they had him participate as a woman in the women's strongman competition. And so he was like, he was still him, but they were making fun of that stuff. So that's another, they should be sticking these issues on ballots. On the good side, before I turn to some questions on locals.
There's Randy Savage.
Somebody
Randy
Savage.
The
They had
Macho
Randy
Man.
Savage.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. He's like, oh yeah, I'm a woman now. Oh yeah.
I'm a woman.
It was great. When South Park is making fun of that in that way, then you know how unpopular trannies or men participating in women's sports are. Just by their gender identity. They're like, what? Hold on a second. That's a big winner. They should continue to push it. Obviously, critical race theory and being opposed to it is a big winner because it gets school moms involved.
Yeah.
They don't want their kids coming home crying saying, mommy, I'm evil. It turns out my skin makes me evil. This is just a crazy, nutty notion.
I was born a loser. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mom, why did you do all those terrible things? All that kind of routine. That's always been unpopular, always going to be unpopular. Another place that they can put it on the ballot wherever, whenever possible. Again, the California tried to put something like critical race theory on the ballot without using the honest language of critical race theory, and it failed even in California.
It still failed.
California tried to reverse, wanted to say you could have race preferences. And even black voters were like, no, that's a bad idea, because that doesn't tend to work out long term for us historically. So, that recognition is there. On the good populist side this week, it was good to see J.D. Vance enter the race.
Absolutely.
I think that,
it's a win.
in Ohio, I think he has a great populist future, especially.
It's a win.
And same with Joe Kent out in Washington is really building his populist imagery, using social media effectively. Now, all of these candidates could be a lot better with their social media presentation. Don't run. What I'm telling all of them is, you don't have to run a traditional campaign. You can run look at Trump learned some things and you can improve on it. There's ways to improve. Why are none of these candidates really using YouTube or locals? Or
some people on the left are brilliant with that. Look,
absolutely,
lover or hater, AOC is extremely effective with those periscopes periscopes,
and it's very authentic. It comes across as very organic, even for someone as fake as AOC is. So why not build that? Why not show different access points? Why not use sort of really effective? They're running campaign ads like they did in the 1980s. If people see the ad. Well, they did the most recent study, and they found campaign ads currently over the last 2 cycles have had no net effect at all. None.
Yeah.
Zero net effect. No matter what.
Motivation should be the point of any kind of digital advertisement at all, Robert. It shouldn't be about persuasion anymore, because it's really just not even possible. It should be about motivation based on someone's worldview. Get out and vote, because believe me, someone who doesn't agree is going to vote too. So well, I don't want to give away the goose here, but it should be completely different.
So many better ways to tell a story. Narrate an effective story. Do it cinematic style. Use Hollywood techniques. Use modern contemporary techniques in the technological revolution to do so. Have a locals candidate page. That can be both a fundraising mechanism, an organization method, a grassroots volunteer method that's outside of and independent of and separate from big tech manipulation and control and censorship. There's all of these possibilities. Tell a story in a more effective visual way, in a visceral way. There's so many other ways to. If you're running a campaign that looks anything like the 1980s, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, without a doubt. And on that J.D. Vance thing, that's a big win for populism, a big loss for Mandel, who was really hoping that he would stay out. I know that, and then also they're worried that he's going to get the Trump endorsement, and I believe he will. I really do think that's probably coming. He raises the money.
Vance is just the stronger candidate. I think Mandel will have a shot. He could return to the shot he should have taken in 2018. Run in 2024. I think if he plays his cards right, even if he finishes second in the primaries, as I think he currently is likely to do, he'll be in good stead to run in 2024 and kick out Dimwit there.
Yeah, and just to tell people what I was saying, I don't trust the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I've already seen them write up with the ballots that they are publishing. I've already seen them write up a couple excuses that are incorrect. Right, so they're trying to. I'll
give them credit for publishing it. They're just really assuming there's no problems in there. People are writing to them saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they're already having to come up with lame excuses for it.
And remember, they are the ones, speaking of Lin Wood, who came... Lin Wood takes the credit for being Richard Jewell's lawyer all the time, but the real lawyer for Richard Jewell, who was his friend, was before Lin Wood, and he defended
And all
Richard
Lin Wood
Jewell
did is lose in court.
He lost.
Lin Wood, I mean, Jewell got a small percentage of the money that he should have got before he passed away. Because every case that went to a final hearing or a trial, Lin Wood lost.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I mean, the point of
but
the AJC,
he also went completely insane, completely nuts. You know, thought the apocalypse was going to happen, and all this other crazy stuff. Guy's a nut job.
I've read some of the court documents. They're out of this world. He is not a lucid person. And I would just say, you know, with the AJC, my distrust of them or dislike of them really goes back that far, because they're really personally responsible. Specifically, a reporter at the AJC, a woman, personally responsible for killing Richard Jewell, destroying his life to the point where he could never recover. He was a very naive person, you know. I guess he would talk about that fake belief, Robert, that the feds were ever the good guys, you know. And then, you know, the media thought, you know, they loved him and, you know, they wouldn't do this to him. You know, one minute they're praising him as a hero. He was really just kind of like your mama's boy, you know. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I'm not trying to be mean here or anything, but he was, you know, a wannabe cop, and they just eviscerated this poor guy in the media, and they accused him of being the killer. I mean, the bomber, you know. So that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution started that all, folks. I mean, the CNN and the rest just followed their lead. They started that, and it was bad information from the jump, but they didn't give a damn, because it was a very ambitious reporter who was under a derelict editor, and she was trying to catch her wave to the big time, man. And that's right. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And ever since then,
there was some corrupt local FBI agents.
Oh, absolutely, yes, indeed, yes, that's right. Particularly the one who couldn't keep it in his pants, right?
It's amazing how much they're gonna. It reminds me of the early '90s. The last time people on the right started turning against federal law enforcement was the combination of Richard Jewell and Waco and Ruby Ridge. Where they, in particular, the same pattern. They're always demonizing white guys with guns at some point. I mean, you know that. I mean, they created PatCon to create fake militia movements to try to infiltrate the actual militia movement, to likely have instigated Oklahoma City, was likely an FBI informant operation gone AWOL. No matter what you think about, even if you believe the rest of the story, there was just McVeigh, it was the van, all that. There's no question there was complicity, culpability, knowledge, participation of FBI and Southern Poverty Law Center informants operating out of Elohim City. So but for that you'd have to watch the Hush Hush at Viva Barnes.
Yeah, and you should, because that was cool. But somebody wants your take on these out, and there were, look, I mean, just from a historical point of view, a large number, and the commenter wanted your take on it, used the word astronomical number of ballots that were kicked into adjudication. And that is, look, Cyber Ninja's doing a very quiet job, professional job, and hush-hush. But that is one of the things we've heard, too. That, you know, it's just a ridiculous number of adjudicated ballots. Robert and I both poured over Georgia. That means is that
there's something, potentially something, now could be something wrong with the way they did the software, the technology. They could have been doing an undue number of ballots. That's always a risk factor there. But the other possibility is that there was something just wrong with the ballots. So that and the question is, how many did they adjudicate and exclude that they shouldn't have adjudicated and excluded? It's the problem with digitization. The theory of digitization is that it removes human subjectivity and the risk of error of human subjectivity from the process, but it really doesn't, because then it just ends up in the software. And it ends up in the coding. It ends up in how you run the machines. And so you could still have the same problem. It's, you know, like sports bettors that say they have a system or they have an algorithm or something. It's like, well, what data did you enter into that algorithm? Because that's the only thing that's going to actually be predictive about it, is the human subjectivity still present. So that there's a lot of ways that can happen. The only way to really assess it is, again, to look at the ballots yourself. So that's how you can figure out, look at all the ballots that were filed, whether they were counted or not counted. They should be in those batches. And what they're finding is discrepancies in Arizona between the number of ballots reported in the batch and how many they found. Similar discrepancies had been previously reported in Georgia. This is why a full, transparent audit would always have this. Now, it's supposed to happen before the audit. I mean, this is why I kept saying there were 3 problems constitutionally with the election. Whether only constitutionally qualified voters voted, whether the method by which they voted was a constitutionally qualified method, and whether the count and the canvass was done in a constitutionally qualified method. Because what they're doing now with the audit is they're recreating what's supposed to happen at the initial canvass and count of the ballots. And the canvass and this is established by a blue ribbon election integrity commissions, is established by the United States Election Assistance Commission, established for uniform international standards by the various international election observer groups that exist, whether it's under the United Nations or anybody else, OECD, whomever. This is why, they even identified America did not comply with internationally recognized standards for the count and canvass of ballots by international observers. They used COVID as the pretext not to do so. Oh, you can't be within this distance or it's going to be such a problem. They also use this centralized method of vote counting and vote gathering that was inherently problematic. So this should have been done at a local precinct level. It should have been done with election observers able to see the whole process. You see them open the ballot. You see them separate the ballot from the original envelope. You match the signature on the outside of the ballot before the ballot is even looked at or separated in.
Which they threw out.
Right. It's all
many states.
Signature matching is the most important part of the process in this election because there were so many mail-in ballots where the only method of voter integrity was the signature match check. There was because they mass bombarded people with ballots in terms of mass mailing ballots. Never had happened before. And then the method of getting them back, including using intermediary drop boxes, completely interrupted, and broke the chain of custody for the ballots. So the only means to make sure that ballot was an honest ballot was to check the signatures against the existing signature. And the question was not whether it's fraud, it's whether the signature was good enough to meet the standards, because the rule is if you choose to vote that way, your signature better match, or it's on you that it doesn't match in the ballot.
That's right. That has been the traditional standard. We threw that out the window this time. By the way, thank you, finally, the Michigan judge. That is what he ruled with Jocelyn Benson. That was what we were arguing, which PolitiFact jumped in the middle of. That was indeed what we were arguing in Michigan at the time, was that she unilaterally changed the traditional standard for verifying signatures. And they said we were lying.
Yeah.
2 months later, 3 months later.
Coerced her. She put out new guidelines in the summer that said even if your signature on file is in cursive and your signature on your ballot is in block print like a 3-year-old, it still might match. It might still be a match. I mean, it was a complete crock. Now, it's embarrassing that nobody on Trump's team sued them. Yeah. Because, again, they were completely asleep at the wheel. And we're going to have to create independent networks, because one of the most popular questions I'm getting in the locals chat is who is creating the independent populist infrastructure. A lot of us had been waiting because we didn't want to step on, or it wouldn't make sense if Trump was going to create it himself. And there were some people around Trump saying that was going to happen back in November and December. Now that it's not happened, it's clear that we're going to have to do so ourselves. So Stephen Miller can be part of that process. Matt Brainerd part of that process. Richard's part of that process. I'll be part of that process. So we have to do so ourselves. We have to create the infrastructure ourselves to support populist ideas, populist political consultants, populist advisors, populist historians, the architects and engineers to make populism last, and to give Trumpism any chance of success in 2024 if he runs, or if anyone else runs on a Trumpist ballot or Trumpist ticket or Trumpist set of ideas. Because I'm still not convinced fully. I say 80% chance Trump runs in 2024, but only 80%.
I have a holdout too. I have a holdout feeling too, Robert. I do. I just feel like, first, I thought I had a pretty good idea
why
of
he
his
didn't
mentality.
go to Trump TV. In his mind, he's better off if he doesn't have an independently branded social media, because he thinks that makes him accessible and the media wants him present. I think that's a mistake strategically, but it made sense of some things that he's been doing, that he's just continued what he was doing during the campaign rather than shift to build an infrastructure, because he's only thinking about running rather than building something lasting. But I think it is going to be a problem. Somebody asked about Mark Elias. He is in trouble in Texas still, but the problem is his state, almost all the state bars are run by liberals. All the Supreme Courts, In all states at some level, the Supreme people think the bar controls your law license. That's not actually true. In some states, the bar is given that authority by the Supreme Court, but ultimately it's always the Supreme Court that decides of that individual state. In some states, the bar has no role at all, and the bar is a voluntary association. But either way, it's the administrative officials working for the courts. They're almost all liberal, so it's going to be very rare that anybody on the left ever gets hit in the modern age.
And that's just a travesty. It's just same thing with what we were talking about earlier, that there has to be another course for, there has to be another place to have, these grievances aired out, Robert. If this one court is so corrupt, and I don't understand how you can't look at the ideological and demographic voting, behavior, all of that. Of that area, how could you possibly try anything of a political nature in that city? It's just not possible.
Speaking of ideological profiles of courts, as a good wrap-up for the show, clearly this term confirmed what we had said back in the fall, which was, and on record talking about all the way back to years before. Though I never blamed Trump for Kavanaugh, because Kennedy said he would not retire unless he picked Kavanaugh, and Kennedy would be the kind of justice to retire when a Democrat was president. That's the kind of guy Kennedy was. So, but for all the people who pretended that Kavanaugh was going to be this fierce conservative, no, Kennedy picked him for a reason. He was going to be like Kennedy, and that's precisely what he has voted like on the bench. A little bit to the right of Kennedy, but not much. Then the second one is the big one. The one I do blame Trump for is Amy Coney Barrett. And everything we predicted about Barrett, that she would be voting with Roberts most of the time.
Yeah, she's Roberts in a skirt, man.
Exactly. That she would not be a new Scalia. That was all a lie. We got hammered by everybody on the right for this. All the legal and political establishment on the right, media establishment. Will Chamberlain praised her to high gear. All of them praised her and praised her and praised her. Ignored her record, ignored her life legacy, ignored who it was that really backed her. She thanks Roberts and McConnell for her being on the bench, not Trump. Trump didn't understand this. Trump got hoodwinked into putting her on, sideswiped into putting her on. And this last term, she's the key vote to, say, state of California might even be able to use COVID as an excuse to limit singing in churches. She's the key vote that stopped election
so much for your
being looked at, both before the election and after the election. Then she's the key vote last week to allow Washington's discrimination against the florists just like the cake baking case, to make sure that case is not heard. And she was a key vote like that throughout the summer. So is she better than? Is she better than the dead justice that was on there for a little while in Ginsburg? Yes, but she's nowhere near who Trump could have put on the bench. What we now have is a Supreme Court that is a 3-3-3 split.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
Now, Gorsuch is on the libertarian side, so because of that, he'll sometimes, like on a gender issue or some other issues, you might see him show up with the left because he's a libertarian guy on the right. But he's going to 9 times out of 10, he's going to be voting with Thomas and Alito, and that's where he already is. So you have 3, but you only have 3 conservatives, not even enough to grant cert. And then you have 3 liberals, and then you have 3 centrists. And those 3 centrists are going to be corporate people first.
Yeah,
and
I was just going to say, are they really centrists, though? Or are they more corporatists, Robert?
Because but that's what they really are. They're corporate
Chamber of Commerce judges
who will look to try to balance, who think of themselves as Platonic guardians, who will try to balance the equation. There are people who thought because Barrett had had adopted a bunch of kids and was at Notre Dame, that meant her a true believer, Scalia-style Catholic. That's a group of people who have not been paying attention to Notre Dame for the last 20 years and what their faculty is really like at Notre Dame.
The left completely duped the so-called, again, I don't mean to name drop them twice in one show, but the Ben Shapiros. They did because those guys are so predictable. Attack them on their religion, and then you get the right all chest puffy, and they'll want to defend you until the death over their religious beliefs, And it was completely easy to forget about healthcare. It was completely easy to forget about the track record on so many other issues. This was supposed to be.
She was the justice who saved Obamacare with Robert's sister.
This is supposed to be the woman who was going to get rid of Obamacare. This is supposed to be the woman who was going to, tell Pennsylvania, yeah, that's it. You can't count those votes. This was going to be the woman who, like the Flores case, was a big kick to those guys. Right to the gut of those
because she was
guys.
supposed to be this big. At least she would be good on religion, and the reality is she's more of an institutionalist, an establishmentarian, a corporatist than she is anything else. And she sees herself as a Platonic guardian who's blessed to tell the rest of us what to do and how to live. And if anybody's been watching the Catholic Church over the last 10 years, they would know it's not the Pope John Paul Catholic Church.
No.
So it's people who weren't paying attention to what was happening. She came from old money South, politically minded. She had campaigned to be on the Supreme Court, which to me, anybody who campaigns to be on the Supreme Court is reasons not to put them on the Supreme Court. Means you can't trust them, you can't rely on them. They're political actors, And I mean, Thomas never thought he was going to be on the Supreme Court. Thomas never campaigned for the Supreme Court.
We could have had a young, attractive, Cuban, solid, conservative. That was the alternative.
Informed that, whose prior judgments informed that.
And her experience, her worldview is right.
Or they could have put, if Trump really had cojones, he would have put Stickman on the bench. Proposed right after Stickman had said the lockdowns are unconstitutional and that the Pennsylvania lockdowns are unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And he'd be putting a Pennsylvania blue-collar Catholic on the bench. During the time where Pennsylvania was going to be, everybody knew how Pennsylvania went, decided the election. That would have been brilliant. But instead, he had a bunch of establishment hacks around him. And he keeps bragging about how many of his endorsed candidates win. Yeah, you endorsed Mitch McConnell, Trump. How did that work out for you? Don't focus on your win rate. Focus on endorsing populist outsiders that are going to challenge the system.
Results.
Have some cojones.
Forget about the scoreboard. Results. There's a bigger scoreboard. There's a much bigger one behind the little one that you keep flashing at everybody. And that's the one that matters. And you're not seeing it because you're so narrowly focused on this tiny little one, and it's a crying shame because some of these it's just indicative of some of these poor judgment calls that really led to where we are now, and that's just the reality.
We could have he could have had Senator Mo Brooks in there instead of the Democratic senator the last 2 years, but for his ego and going along with whatever Mitch McConnell told him.
Yeah.
So I do hope he shows at least some better political instincts in that space. The one thing people keep forgetting about him is Trump did not win 2016 by himself, no matter how many times he tells people that. Trump won because from 2012 to 2016, he went from a guy saying that Romney was too hard on immigration in 2013. People don't remember that. That's what he was telling people.
Yeah, he did.
Privately in 2013.
He's too cruel.
To being the guy who was, let's build the wall, because he hired a bunch of smart populists around him that had some crazy attributes to them. So I understand why they didn't stay around him, but they were giving him good advice. Listen to Michael Savage, listen to Alex Jones, listen to the populist sources. You see CNN was going nuts yesterday about that's no surprise. Tucker and Alex Jones are friends. Tucker watches Alex Jones all the time.
Tucker want to get rid of him.
Oh, exactly. I mean, Tucker understood this is where the populist zeitgeist is. That you can skip some of Alex's more embellishments and more dramatic components and stick to the core that Alex has his finger right on the pulse of populist conservatism in America on the right. He has for a decade. The Trump, and so what did Trump do? He was channeling those people by listening to them, by listening to their audience, by paying attention to that group. And by 2018, he quit doing that. And he let people around him cut him off from that. He was no longer, he used to, listen to like people like Charles Johnson, other people. He had a wide range of populist sources that he was paying attention to. And, and he was still paying a little bit of attention to some, but more just through Twitter. Once he lost his Twitter feed, thank God for Tucker Carlson or Trump would totally be in the wilderness because he relies on that for knowing what the base wants. And remember, he's a marketer, and a marketer needs good information about what customers want. And the problem is he is out of touch on a lot of that. And he needs to, and if he's going to get back in touch on that, he needs to put more populist people around him and start paying more attention to populist sources.
Yeah, he's going to have to rely on them more now more than ever.
Yes.
Having good people around him, because he is cut off, and without a doubt, that was part of it. That was part of the reason. Not only because he got around the media and he was able to get right to his fan base, his voting base. It was more than that. I mean, really, now they killed his reach, but they killed his ability to communicate. Yes,
daily reports
on
reports. It was a combination of Michael Savage, Alex Jones, and Rush Limbaugh. Those were the three primary sources of information for Trump between 2013 and 2015 when he started.
What do my people want?
Sam Nunberg was giving him daily reports. Here's what they're talking about. Here's what they're talking about. He liked it printed out, like a newspaper style. Yeah, because he is still obsessed with the New York Times and all that. But back then, half his time was spent on the New York Times and those publications. The other half of the time was spent on those on talk radio. He needs to get back to that. He needs to have somebody around him that's spoon feeding. What's the populist base saying? That's why he was ahead of the curve than even Ted Cruz, because Cruz was connected to that group, but not as well connected. And because Cruz had too many National Review conservatives around him, they didn't understand what the Alex Jones audience was saying, what the Michael Savage audience was saying. Why
they were embarrassed by those people. The National Review folks, they're like embarrassed by those folks.
Oh,
like,
yes.
People, we want your vote.
So beneath them. So they're let them eat cake kind of people. And that's why Trump was able to do circles around him. But Trump needs to go back to that. And, it's fine to be, his ego is a blessing and a curse, a virtue and a vice. But at times it's more a curse and a vice than a blessing and a virtue when he doesn't have smart people around him, when he chooses to have weak people around him. And frankly, that's what a lot of the people he has around him right now are. They're weak people. At least I understand how Rudy Giuliani co-opted the election litigation. He stole my idea and pretended it was mine. So but that's c'est la vie. That ship has sailed.
But
Rudy.
Trump
needs to put. Trump does need to put better people around him, but independent of Trump, our focus needs to be, and the people care about populism, is building a lasting populist infrastructure, for which I think a key part, as a good exit for the show, is locals. And I'll be at the live chat afterwards at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
There you have it, and folks, that's where you can go ahead and follow Robert and Viva Fry, both great. Those hushes are incredibly entertaining. You need to check them out. And remind me later, I'll tell you something. You were talking about something, and then I was watching a show on Reels, and I'm like, oh my God, he was right about that. They even brought it, but I'll tell you after the show, because that's a whole new conversation. But it was out there. The hushes are really cool, folks. Check them out. And then, of course, mine's up there, peoplespundit.locals.com. We'll be back next Monday. Robert, as always, thanks for joining us, my friend. And I'll see you next week. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Follow along, and we'll see you on the flip side of all this. All the best.